Hey folks, Steve here. It's the show where I answer your question, and this week's first question comes from Lucas Hackett, one angry brony, who says, Yo Steve, which one of these would you rather try and why? Mount Midoriyama from American Ninja Warrior, the Slobstacle Course from Double Dare, or the Eliminator from American Gladiators? P.S. You have to do them blindfolded. Just a little twist there. Well, I've never actually watched American Ninja Warrior, so I'm going to cross that one off. For me, it's down to the Slobstacle Course and the Eliminator, and I'm going to go with the Eliminator, actually, because even though I think there's a greater chance that I would be severely injured by doing the Eliminator blindfolded, everything around it was always padded, so I think even if I hurt myself, I wouldn't fatally hurt myself, whereas with the Slobstacle Course and Double Dare, I mean, that's a lot of really wet, goopy stuff. I mean, if I was blindfolded and tripped and fell, I mean, I could drown in a pool of gack, and who would really want to see that? And that's the sound we're going with this week. Okay, cool. Next up is a question from Crowbro, who says, Hi Steve, I've enjoyed the hangouts you've been doing about the anti-social justice attitudes in the online atheist community, and it got me thinking, what would it take to convince them social justice is a good thing and that anti-social justice attitudes keep religion alive? Because like it or not, they are the ones doing the most charity. Liberal churches are even fighting for LGBT rights now and racial equality. So as long as there are underprivileged, oppressed people, there will always be religion. Do you think this might be the message us non-asshole atheists need to push? I do think that's a message worth pushing, not just for the betterment of the atheist community and the atheist movement itself, but just for society as a whole. I would love, the True Puka and I did a hangout the other night where one of the things we mentioned was how great it would be if the atheist movement was better at sort of building bridges with other organizations, with other movements outside of atheism or secularism, because there are way more religiously affiliated groups that are trying to do positive charity work, that are trying to help the poor, help the underprivileged in many ways. And it would just be nice to see secular movements, more secular movements and more numerous secular movements, more high-profile secular movements reaching out and building bridges and doing that work. But is that the message that's going to convince anti-social justice atheists, the asshole atheists as you call them, to come around to support social justice movements? Probably not. I mean, I think for the asshole atheists to drop the anti-social justice shtick, one of two things is going to have to happen. Either the market for that is going to have to dry up. We're going to have to see some kind of sea change in the marketplace for online content where there isn't that dependable audience that is receptive to the anti-feminist, anti-social justice stuff. Either that, or people who have that view will have to come to realize that maybe they face some oppression and marginalization themselves, and then allow that to inform their outlook on other marginalized groups. And I've always found it puzzling that atheists would look down their noses and be so cynical and so sneering and dismissive of social justice movements designed to lift up marginalized people when atheists themselves are marginalized. They don't seem to make the connection between them being a member of a marginalized group that deserves to be treated better and other people in other marginalized groups advocating for the same thing. So there would have to be something would have to happen to flick that switch, to get people to realize, oh shit, if we want atheists to be treated fairly, if we want justice and equality and inclusion for atheists in our society, then we shouldn't be fighting against women who want the same thing, or black folks who want the same thing, or LGBTQ folks who want the same thing. What is it going to take for that to happen? I wish I knew. Morally Gray says, given that many have proposed discussions with you on these topics where I feel it would be fair to argue that some of them could be pulling moral double blinds against you, in what scenario can you imagine having a discussion with someone on these topics where they disagree with you, facilitated here on YouTube? Would it be with anyone in particular, a person that argues in a more favorable way, less abrasive way, or is this something that could simply never happen? No. Not really. I have no interest in having a debate or a discussion with an anti-feminist where we argue about whether or not feminism is needed or justified or whether or not women are oppressed. I have no interest in having a debate or a discussion with someone over whether or not black folks are affected by racism or whether systemic racism is still a problem. I have no interest in arguing about the existence of these problems because I don't think the existence of these problems is arguable. I would liken it to, if I were a geologist, I would not want to waste time having debates with flat earthers. That's the situation that this is. There are people who are simply denying facets of reality. They're saying women aren't oppressed. They're saying there is no such thing as systemic racism, or that black people who say they're affected by racism just need to quit complaining. You know? I have no interest in engaging people like that. Now, I said in response to one of your earlier questions, Morally Gray, my mind is open in the sense that if you can show me evidence that the evidence I have based my conclusions on is wrong, I'm willing to revise my position. But it's going to take a lot more than some asshole atheist, as they were dubbed in the previous question, having a talk with me or arguing with me about it in a YouTube video to convince me that women are no longer oppressed, or that there is no wage gap, or that, you know, black folks no longer suffer from discrimination due to systemic racism. I mean, it would be just like trying to convince me that the earth does not go around the sun. I mean, the stakes are much higher, and it has a much higher standard than just one person convincing me with their great argument that somehow hasn't affected the rest of the world, but it sure as hell going to convince me that this thing, which to me is painfully obvious and very, very firmly confirmed and substantiated by evidence, just doesn't exist. So no, I have no interest in wasting my time arguing with anti-feminists, rape apologists, racists, or people who defend and apologize for such people. I just think it's a waste of my time. I'm sorry. Will Vexus, do you think that Jim Gordon is the true hero of the Batman story? He's honest when surrounded by liars, which even puts his life at stake. He obeys the law, but can see where it may be wrong. He's the most principled character, in my opinion, and he sticks to those principles. I mean, why didn't Bruce Wayne put in like half of the effort that he put into being Batman into being an incredible DA? Oh, hey, new TV show idea. A person does everything they can to be the best damn DA they can because they see their city crumbling with corruption. That's sort of like the storyline that they gave Harvey Dent in the first half of The Dark Knight, right? Before he falls and becomes Two-Face. He's sort of the creative, heroic DA. And even Batman is like, that's the way to go. Like, he's so awesome at being a DA, I think I can quit being Batman. Jim Gordon is one of those characters that you can't do Batman without him. You know what I mean? But at the same time, if you make him the lead, if you make Jim Gordon the focus of the book, it starts to illustrate the flaws of the Batman character. You know what I mean? In the same way as like the crusading DA suggestion sort of does. If you start to deconstruct the concept of Batman and you examine it too closely, it starts to fall apart because you can ask yourself questions very easily with just a little bit of thought. Like, well, if Bruce Wayne is so rich, why doesn't he use his money and his effort on projects that would have a much wider impact positively for Gotham City than being Batman? Like, being Batman is a great way to be the hero of an adventure comic or a detective comic or be a superhero, but, you know, if you actually want to improve things in your city and you're a billionaire, there are about 1 million things you can do that would be a much greater help to your city than dressing up like a bat and going out and beating up criminals every night. It just makes no sense to do that. It's just a completely preposterous thing to do. Whereas Jim Gordon is the guy who goes to work every day, has to work in an incredibly hostile environment. As you said, he in most modern depictions of the Batman story, the Gotham City Police Department is very corrupt, is a very tough place, a very morally compromised place, and now you have this very principled good man who wants to do good for his city, trying to navigate this incredibly treacherous territory. I mean, that's a really compelling story. It undermines Batman if you focus on it too much, but if you have that character as like a background character or a supporting character, it's an incredibly compelling character. And also the fact that even though Gordon is extremely principled and extremely usually portrayed as being pretty by the book, He's pals with Batman. He tolerates Batman. He enables Batman. I think Commissioner Gordon is one of the great characters, certainly one of the great supporting characters in superhero comics. But is he the real hero? No, he's not the real hero. And if he were, then it would only underline why all of the problems with Batman. And that would be bad because, as you can see from my shirt, I'm a huge Batman fan. I don't want to come up with reasons in the Batman stories why Batman shouldn't be Batman. That's better reserved for, for nerd talk outside of the stories, like we're doing. Monique Smith, Dear Steve, I recently saw your video Brock Turner's Rape Apology Blues, the Facepalm 5, and I must say I felt a little uneasy about a part you did. Rape is terrible, but I have a hard time seeing Brock Turner's dad as a rape apologist and just see him as a desperate father who wants to protect his son. I have a feeling most parents' unconditional love would do anything for their kids. I'm not saying Brock is innocent or that his father is rational. What I am saying is that in the end of the day, his dad is a parent who loves his son, and as irrational as he is, I have a hard time seeing him as a bad person or a rape apologist. My blame is mostly on the judge and the court system. So my two questions are, number one, any thoughts on my personal reasoning, way of thinking? And number two, what would you do if you were Brock Turner's dad? Well, it's a good question, and you do have a point. I mean, I don't think there was anything malicious in what Brock Turner's dad did, where he wrote the letter to the judge sort of asking for leniency for his son and basically saying, look, he just made a mistake and now he's going to ruin his whole life. What made it so difficult to take was the fact that the attitude shared by Brock Turner's father in that letter has been for many, many years the prevailing attitude and the common excuse for men who are accused or even convicted of rape in this country, where we're asked to have sympathy for them. We're asked to have sympathy for the rapist and to think, oh, just imagine how this is going to affect his life. This is a good boy. And look how it's going to affect his life. Now his whole future has been thrown up in the air, So yeah, you're right. It's his father. He's looking out for his son. He's trying to get the best deal he can for his son, as many, many parents I'm sure would do. I mean, maybe it's a little unfair to accuse him of being a rape apologist in that sense, but when you see that attitude represented yet again, when you see yet another person speaking out to a judge and asking for leniency for someone who is an admitted and convicted rapist and saying, oh, but let's think about the impact it'll have on them. What's it going to do to their life? And they have expressed, if at all, maybe just token sympathy for the person that was actually raped. I'm not saying that you feel any differently about it than I do, but I'm just trying to explain, when I think about it, my sympathies lie completely with the survivor, and I have very little sympathy for the Brock Turners of the world, especially when I know that they live in a society that is going to wind up treating them rather lightly for what they did. But yeah, I see your reasoning. I see what you're saying. I don't think you're being unreasonable. It's just not the reaction that I had. And as for what would I do if I were Brock Turner's father, I don't know. I don't know. I would like to think that, I wouldn't want to just abandon my kid. I wouldn't kick him out of the house and be like, I have no son. But, I don't know if I would be asking the judge to go easy on him. If my son did something like that, as much as I would still love him and want to have him as a member of my family and want to support him and try to, be there for him as much as I could, I would also be absolutely disgusted by what he did and disappointed and dismayed, and I would be reconciling myself to my son, the rapist, receiving the punishment that the judge felt was fit. And if I thought it was appropriate, if I thought I could get away with it without causing more pain, I would try to reach out to the person that he raped. And I would try to say, how sorry I am and how disappointed I am and how appalled and outraged and grieved that I am that my child inflicted this pain on you. And if there's anything I can do for you, if you want me to leave you alone and never talk to you again for the rest of your life, I completely understand, and I will leave you alone. But if you ever need anything from me, please let me know, because I am so sorry for what happened. that's the sort of thing I would hope I would do if I were in a situation like Brock Turner's father. But I mean, I can't say what I would do for sure or not. I've never remotely been in that situation. Monique Agwe. I'm a lesbian woman, so I enjoy seeing an LGBT person in shows. I recently finished a cartoon show, Avatar: The Last Airbender, and the sequel, The Legend of Korra. This is a show on Nickelodeon, so it's a PG show. In the first 3 seasons, Korra likes this guy named Mako. Then in the last season, Korra became friends with Asami, Mako's ex-girlfriend. Then on the last ep of season 4, last season, Korra defeats the villain, and in the last 10 minutes there's a celebration event. Eventually, Asami and Korra get together to talk. Asami brings up how sad she would have been if Korra died, and Korra says the same back. And then Asami asks Korra to go to a vacation with her, and Korra agrees. Korra and Asami walk up to the portal into the spirit world, and then hold hands and just stare at each other, and the series ends. At first, when the creator was asked about this, he said, you can interpret it however you want. And then a week later, he admitted, okay, fine, they were lesbians. The creator said they didn't want to admit it at first and had to be very subtle about it because Nickelodeon told them they couldn't be straightforward. And this bothers me because he was a coward and didn't even have the bravery to put it in the show and make it clear, and instead went around the bush to hint at it, wink wink, to the fans. But also, this sudden change of character and making her a lesbian does not feel genuine. I have very mixed feelings about it. Do you think a good story should be sacrificed to satisfy a group? Should he just have not done the non-clear lesbian at all, since Nickelodeon would limit him? I know it's long, I'm sorry. I would deeply appreciate it if you answer. Well, I haven't watched the show, so I mean, I can't make a judgment as to how well it worked in that show. I mean, it sounds to me like you don't think it worked, and I can understand why. I mean, it does seem like kind of an out-of-left-field thing. It seems like the creator's intentions were good. Like maybe the creator was thinking, you know, I want to have a gay character in this show. Like I want to have one of our main characters be revealed to be a lesbian, or at least, you know, have sexuality that is, you know, open enough that she would have a relationship with a woman as well as with a man. Like I just want this to be a part of our lead character. But then they don't introduce that at all until the very, very end. Like I can see why that's a problem and why it would feel tacked on, you know. And I think maybe creatively the best choice would be to not do it. You know, as difficult as that would be. I mean, if Nickelodeon or whatever the network happens to be is saying, nah, don't do that, probably the most creative choice, the most creatively strong choice would be just to not do it, to make the best show you can within the limitations that you have. Or to introduce the ambiguous bit earlier. You know what I mean? Like if you want to make her sexuality a little more ambiguous without going straight forward and saying, hey, she's gay, maybe just introduce the ambiguity a little sooner. Don't wait until like the last scene of the last episode of the show to be like, oh, by the way, you know? I mean, that's kind of what, I don't know if you ever watched the sitcom Roseanne, but that's one of the big problems that people had with the last episode of Roseanne was like in the last, you know, 5 minutes of the last episode of Roseanne. By the way, spoiler alert, anybody who hasn't seen the last episode of Roseanne, don't watch the rest of this answer. But in the last like 5 minutes of the last episode of Roseanne, it's revealed that like all of the previous season was just made up, that it didn't actually happen in the world of the characters, that it was something that Roseanne had been making up, had been writing, and like there was a major character who was revealed to be gay, and another major character was revealed to have been dead all along. It's just, and it's like a lot of information and a lot of twists and changes to sort of drop on the audience at the very end and be like, bye everybody, goodbye forever. So yeah, that kind of thing. It really needs, if that's what you want to, where you want to go with your character, if that's the story you want to tell, then I think you need to make it a part of the character in a way where if it's introduced after the character is already established, then the audience has time to assimilate it and to make sure that it feels like a natural part of the character. You know, like they did with Willow on Buffy the Vampire Slayer, where her sexuality was sort of assumed to be straight up until she started having a relationship with a woman. And, you know, it felt kind of sudden at first, but they stuck with it and they made it a part of her character. And it became very easy to accept that as just a part of who she was, because they didn't just drop it in all of a sudden and be like, oh, last episode, Willow's gay, everybody, bye. You know, I think that's the part that's tough to take. I mean, representation is incredibly important. I would love to see more openly gay, openly bi characters. I would love to see more characters representing all different places on the the spectrum of sexuality, the continuum of gender. I would love to see so much more diversity and representation of all of these things, but you can't just drop it in at the last minute and say, oh, by the way, she's a lesbian. That just doesn't work. And I can imagine it not working for that show. I think I see where you're coming from. Dr. Themo, hey Steve, I was recently reminded of the belief that men cannot be considered feminists, allies, though not self-appointed, but not feminists. My first reaction was that the title shouldn't matter, but I got to thinking about it and I read a bit about it some more. I believe the idea, if I understand correctly, is that there's too big a risk that men will make feminism about themselves and put women's issues aside, never to be addressed, that feminism will be distorted in the public eye into something it isn't supposed to be. That seems to make sense to me, but I don't feel like I fully understand just yet. What are your thoughts? I think a good way to look at it is to keep in mind that feminism as a movement is centered on women. And that doesn't mean that men can't participate. It doesn't mean that men can't be a part of it. But the focus of the movement is not on men, it's on women. And since women are the centered group, it only makes sense that women should have more control over the direction of the group, over the direction of the movement than men would have, because it's for women primarily. Again, men can participate and men certainly can benefit from feminism, but it's ultimately not for us. I like the idea not just of allyship being something that you can't declare for yourself, but feminism in general. I mean, I used to struggle with whether or not to call myself a feminist, and I still do. Like sometimes in the course of conversation, I'll say I am one, and sometimes I'll say I'm an ally or I'm a supporter. It's difficult, and I have close friends, men and women, who have different feelings about how to handle that. You know what I mean? Is it right for a man to declare himself to be a feminist? And I have come down on that, basically deciding that I want to live in a way and conduct myself in a way so that I would be thought of as a feminist. So that women who are feminists, who look at me and look at the things I say and look at the way I handle myself and look at just the way I conduct myself in my life, would say, I accept him as a feminist. He is a feminist. And I think that's the most that I can hope for. That's as bold as I can be, to qualify as one in the eyes of people who have more of a right to make that judgment than I do. But I think the key insight is that it's a movement centered on women. And because of that, men should definitely take a role, and definitely take an active role, but it should be a supportive role, a secondary role. Women should be the ones driving the ship, because it is ultimately a movement centered on women and dedicated to battling a form of equality that disadvantages women. So it's only right that women should be at the forefront of it. I don't know. I hope that helps. Okay. That noise means that it's the end of this round, and it is time for the back portion of the show, which we also like to call
the lightning round.
And we really mean it this week because it's going to be a short lightning round. First up from Ahoy Earno, lightning round question. Tons of people claim you maintain a safe space and that you block everyone who disagrees with you on anything. So for the record, I disagree with you on the following. Your attitude on sex work, both your old swerfish position and your current hesitant acceptance. I'm not too hot about basic income either. I find professional wrestling boring and pretentious. As an autist, I don't find stupid ableist. I like that you freshened up the series, but I'm not convinced about the reasons why. Veganism is a mistake. I prefer reduction of meat intake and a focus on ethical meat. Your position on religion and charity is flawed to say the least. So here's the question. Can we have a civil disagreement on these topics, or will you block me? Blocked. For the wrestling comment, for the record. Doug Putoff, happy belated 200th. I have a question. Chuck Norris or Samuel L. Jackson? Oh, well, if you're going to talk about like who I want to be a narrator for something, I'm going to have to go with Samuel L. Jackson. Who's the better actor? Samuel L. Jackson. But who do I want as my meat-headed star of a big over-the-top action movie? It's Chuck Norris every time, baby. Chuck Norris every time. You know why? Because he doesn't step on toes. He steps on necks. Joshua Purvis. Hi, Steve. My question is, what are your favorite matches on the network, meaning the WWE network? Is there one that comes to mind? I like Shawn Michaels versus Undertaker and Stone Cold versus Rock. What's yours? Thanks. I enjoy your videos. P.S. I like the Stone Cold podcast. So do I. I love Steve Austin's podcast. The usual favorite matches for people, I guess, like Savage versus Steamboat from WrestleMania 3, the Steamboat Flair series from 1989. I love watching those. I love some of the more recent NXT matches, like especially from the NXT TakeOver shows. Like I thought Nakamura versus Sami Zayn from the TakeOver this year before WrestleMania I think that's still the best match I've seen all year. The Cruiserweight Classic has been amazing. The two matches on this week's episode of the Cruiserweight Classic were absolutely phenomenal. Especially Kota Ibushi versus Cedric Alexander. It was just an amazing match. So yeah, those are some good ones. Oh, and the Benoit Jericho versus Austin Triple H tag team match from May 21st, 2001 episode of Raw. One of my all-time favorite matches, available on the network. Skull Morris, do you ever regret making the character of Jack an alcoholic, given the stereotypes about the Irish? Yes. Yes, I do. Occasionally. Blackie Comics, who would win in a fight, Trogdor or Godzilla? Well, I only know that Trogdor exists. Like, I know that it's a dragon with a big muscly arm. I don't know anything else about it. I never watched, like, the web series that it comes from, so I'm gonna have to go with Godzilla because he's the one I know. And Godzilla is a great big giant radioactive dinosaur who breathes radioactive breath and destroys Tokyo for a living. So I'm gonna go with Godzilla. I'm gonna have to go with Godzilla over Trogdor. But maybe I'm underestimating Trogdor. I don't really know him that much. Hey, that's it for the questions. It was a short lightning round, only 5 lightning round questions this week. Before I get out of here, I'm going to go with a shout out, as I usually do. The shout out this week goes to an awesome podcast called Geeks Without God. And this is a podcast that is hosted by 3 atheist comedians from Minnesota. They talk about TV and movies and games and just, nerdy stuff from an atheist perspective. And it's really a lot of fun. And they also talk about social issues. They talk about politics. They talk about things that are going on in the world today. And they recently did a show about Black Lives Matter. I think about 2 weeks ago was a show where they talked about Black Lives Matter. I think their most recent episode, they talked about some issues in the gaming industry, how the gaming industry is trying to be more inclusive to women and some of the steps that have been taken in that direction recently. It's a really, really cool show. It's a funny show. It's a great show to listen to. If you are a godless type person, an atheist, a non-believer of some stripe, and you're also into nerdy stuff like comics or video games or movies or whatever, it's a really cool show. I highly recommend that you check it out. I hope you give it a listen, and I hope that you dig it. It's Geeks Without God. There's the link in the description box. And please do go check it out, and I hope you enjoy it. I also want to remind you to check out the Let Me Listen podcasts, because those are some more podcasts that I really do hope you enjoy for a little bit more selfish reasons. The Let Me Listen podcasts are a whole series of podcasts produced by my good friend Jason Harding, a.k.a. Jason with a D, of Opinionville, which is a YouTube channel you should be watching. And the Let Me Listen podcasts consist of Let Me Finish, which Jason co-hosts with Finite Atticus, American Monsters and How to Destroy Them, the improv comedy podcast that is now in its 2nd season and is just awesome. Cinema Shack, which is a great movie review podcast. Cinetific, which is the newest Let Me Listen podcast, where Professor Jason and Professor Aaron review the scientific validity of some of your favorite movies. Their first episode was about Ghostbusters, and it was hilarious. Check out Cinetific if you haven't listened to it yet. And then, of course, last but certainly not least, the closest to my heart, my favorite of the Let Me Listen podcast, because it's the one that I'm on, is Late Seating, a movie review podcast that Jason co-hosts with me, where we talk about classic films, we re-watch them, we re-evaluate them, we decide whether or not they deserve their reputations, whether we're talking about a film that has been hailed as one of the all-time greats or a film that has been dismissed as one of the all-time worst. We give them a fresh watch, we make fun of them, we review them, and we decide if they deserve their reputation, whatever the reputation may be. And our most recent episode, which you can listen to if you haven't already, is about the Arnold Schwarzenegger action classic Commando. You can listen to that episode. You can listen to all of our previous episodes of Late Seating and all of the episodes of all of the excellent Let Me Listen podcasts by going to letmelistenpodcast.com. And I really hope you do. I don't think you'll regret it. That's it for me, everybody. I want to remind you, as always, to please leave a comment on this video asking me your question for next time. You can ask me anything about anything. Nothing is too serious. Nothing is too silly. I will answer as many of your questions as I possibly can in the next video. So until the next video, take care, everybody. Hey folks, one more thing before I go. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And also, please consider helping me to make more videos like this one by supporting this channel through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.